What's going on, Dolphins? It is your boy Dillon, and I got a couple quick updates for you, or at least I'll try and make them as fast as I possibly can. But there are a couple important things to update you guys on, and so let's get right into it. The first thing, there are reports out that the NFL and the NFLPA are discussing players' potential opt-out date for 2020 season. So in other words, and this is something that I've mentioned regarding other sports, there are players opting out of their seasons. Now, there are, like, for example, there was a race car driver who's not going to be, or wasn't participating in a race, but that was because he actually caught COVID. There are several players from different sports, basketball, baseball, whatever, that are just opting out of playing the season because of the concerns with COVID, etc., etc. Anyway, so let's get into the details. The NFL and the NFL Players Association are reportedly discussing an option for players to opt out of the 2020 season based on the ongoing coronavirus pandemic, according to Tom Pelissero of NFL Network. Pelissero explained the situation Wednesday on NFL Now via Kevin Patra of NFL.com. My understanding is both the union and the league intend to have an opt-out for players who have either a pre-existing condition, family members with pre-existing conditions, just general concerns over COVID-19, would not want to play the season. General managers were told on a call earlier this week there would be a specific date by which players would need to opt out. That date is still to be determined. So, just real quick, a couple things there, because obviously this is ongoing. So before they got to the part of just general concerns over COVID-19 as a reason that they could opt out, I was skeptical. Because if you're only saying, I mean, it's good to be able to let people with pre-existing conditions and close family members, etc., but healthy people can get sick and die from it too. So that's ridiculous. And healthy people should be able to opt out if they just have general concerns. So, but that is in there, and so that is good to give them credit there. However, and again, this is ongoing, but there would be a date in which they would need to opt out by. So they're going to give them, a time frame. And training camp is like less than 3 weeks away. So they could set the date between now and then, because they could be like, well, you have to decide before training camp if you're gonna not play the season, so we know if you're gonna be in training camp, right? Which would honestly be somewhat logical. The problem is then that only gives people a few weeks to figure that out, and then obviously any players that do decide to opt out could then obviously cause other issues, like, for example, now it also depends on the player, but if there's star players that sit out, that causes huge problems obviously for franchises as far as football goes. Players are expected to report to camp on July 28th, with the season set to begin on time in September. The league has reportedly decided to shorten the preseason to just 2 games from the original 4, but Commissioner Roger Goodell told reporters last month the plan is to get ready for games at our stadiums. And so, just real quick, as we know, the players and the NFLPA are pushing back on the preseason, saying they should cancel it all, but there has been no actual definitive, word on that to this point, other than it seems pretty concrete that the NFL is going to drop 2 games, but there has been no real response to this point on whether or not they're going to acquiesce to the call from the NFLPA and the players to eliminate them altogether. Sports leagues have utilized different strategies to account for the coronavirus, including the NBA playing all of its games without fans at the Walt Disney World Complex in Orlando, Florida. Let's note, though, that bubble that they're talking about has been penetrated by coronavirus, and they were thinking about doing a second bubble because of that, which is absurd and wouldn't work. But let's also note they did their bubble in one of the most heavily affected states in the country because of the leadership just actively suppressing the real information and just completely disregarding the health and public safety of people and opening shit up. Anyway, as you guys have heard me say a million times at this point. The league allowed players to opt out of competing, an option taken by big names like Bradley Beal and Victor Oladipo. MLB games will be held at their usual ballparks in a shortened 60-game season, but several players have opted out of this season as well, including David Price, Ian Desmond, and Felix Hernandez. I don't really know those names anywhere near. Some of those names are a little bit familiar, just probably because I've seen them in like headlines or maybe in a story or something, but obviously I don't follow other sports as much as football, but I'll take the writer's word for it that they're big names. But again, that causes problems. And I mean, I've said a million times, I don't think they can control any of this, and it's just going to continue to get worse, and they're going to end up having to shut down eventually anyway. The NFL appears ready to also give players an option to skip the 2020 season if they are concerned about their health. Buffalo Bills receiver Stephon Diggs was among those, noting his concern about the upcoming year. And this is a tweet from him, but there's so many unanswered questions with this upcoming season. I'd be lying if I said I was comfortable starting back up. And look, man, like I said, Stephon Diggs, that in the offseason, that was a huge trade for the Buffalo Bills. And, the star wide receiver they just got might not even play, right? Per Pelissero, one of the biggest questions is whether a contract will toll for players who opt out, putting them one step closer to free agency. Now, this is a huge deal, right? And the outcome of that is massive, because what does that mean? So if players opt out this season, so they might be giving them that option, but then if they turn around and say, but it's also going to toll against your contract, what that means is then they lose a year of their contract, but they also don't get paid for it, right? Because they're not playing. And because we already went through that in these contracts, and with the way that they're, pushing even further for this types of thing with having players sign waivers, et cetera, if they're not there, and I read you the thing that if they play one game, they're entitled to their pay, but if they opt out of the entire season, their contracts, most of them at least from what I read to you guys before, already have language that says they won't get paid. So they wouldn't get paid, they would lose a year of their contract without pay, and then be forced into free agency, which, maybe it goes well for them, maybe it doesn't. I mean, there are a lot of things. So, and I think right now the likelihood is far greater that it doesn't work out well. But anyway, so, I mean, it's, yeah, anyway, so that's an ongoing thing. Obviously, we have to wait and see how that develops. Yeah, so we're going to transition a little bit because there is some more news regarding some of the overall state of things in the NFL at this moment. So there's this report from CBS Sports or whatever, and this was reported by multiple sources too, but this is where I'm getting the article, and it's talking about the Ravens who, this is the headline, Ravens drastically cut stadium capacity in move that hints at what NFL attendance will look like in 2020. So real quick, if you haven't heard already, up to this point, all the teams were selling tickets at max capacity except for the Packers. God damn it, I keep getting this mixed up now in my head. It's either the Packers or the Steelers. One of those two teams was selling, maybe it's the Steelers, was selling at 50% capacity. That was the lowest any team was selling up to this point. Then we got the update, though, that they were, the stadiums were going to be blocking off the bottom 8 rows, so obviously that cuts capacity a little bit, but that certainly isn't even close to 50%, right? So they could still have up to 50% of the stadiums filled. Well, this will be the first change since then that we're hearing of a team, switching it up and saying, okay, we're looking at not having a full stadium or whatever. So let's get into the details of this. Over the past few weeks, teams around the NFL have been trying to figure out what their stadium capacity should be for the upcoming season. And if the Baltimore Ravens are any indication, it's starting to look like NFL stadiums are going to be mostly empty this year. The Ravens announced on Wednesday that the capacity at M&T Bank Stadium will be set to just 14,000, which is an 81.3% cut from the stadium's normal capacity of roughly 71,000. Okay, so pause there real quick to evaluate. So, in other words, their normal stadium capacity is 71,000. That's 100%. They are cutting 81.3% of that down to 14%. Obviously, that is going to drastically decrease their revenue. But you're still going to have 14,000 people in the stadium. Sure, they can, theoretically you can implement social distancing measures and say, okay, you can even sell tickets that are for, the way that they sell tickets, they can ensure that people are socially distanced. But that's about as far as it goes. Because then once those 14,000 people come into the stadium, it's on them if they're going to decide to fucking wear masks or wear them the entire time. You don't know who's going to have it when they come in. There's been some talk about testing, but then what if, it doesn't really even matter, because if they arrive at the stadium and they have it and they test them there, and even if they, turn them away after they test positive, they still could have already spread it to other people that won't test positive because they literally just inhaled it minutes before. And it's primed to still have outbreaks, but it's a step in the right direction. Now, I hope that it keeps going in that direction, and then eventually, everything just gets shut down and they don't take the risk to begin with. But we'll see, because the other side, the opposing side to that, obviously is as I mentioned and we've talked about a lot, that's going to drastically decrease the revenue that they bring in. 81.3% of their revenue from having people in the stadiums to buy concessions that bought tickets will be gone. Right? And so there's a lot of money to be lost there, and we'll see how this plays out. But it's good on the Ravens organization to at least take that step. Now we'll see if that's where it ends or if they continue going in that direction. There's also a chance that fans won't be allowed to attend any Ravens games at all, but that decision hasn't been made yet. Well, hopefully it does. Before making a final decision on whether, but again, to be clear, from my perspective, that's still not even enough. They need to cancel the season, because then they're still going to be putting the lives of the coaching staffs, the players, the support staffs, the referees, the camera crews, all of that in jeopardy. Those people will still be in jeopardy. Anyway, before making a final decision on whether or not fans will be allowed to attend games, team president Dick Cass said that the Ravens will monitor protocols being developed by health experts, governmental officials, and the NFL. Well, I don't know how things are going in Baltimore, but I would venture to guess it's, at the very least, I can reasonably assume that it's a lot better than, let's say, Florida, Florida is one of the biggest epicenters in this country right now for the coronavirus. So, they have to be doing a lot better, and clearly with this decision are doing better, because there is actually something Dolphins specific on this topic that a tweet that I saw that I will give you in a minute to tell you what, how the Dolphins are thinking. But Florida is the worst place. So clearly, Baltimore, they're making better decisions. And I don't know the state of it in their city, or their, the status of it in their city or their state, the virus specifically, but it's bad everywhere, and it's getting worse everywhere. So this is definitely the direction they need to go in. To offer a proper level of safety for fans who want to attend games, a reduction in capacity is necessary, Cass said. We are disappointed that this will be a disruption for many ticket buyers, but we have an obligation to our fans and our community to keep M&T Bank Stadium as safe as possible. And again, that's great, and that they're moving in that direction, but they need to continue to go further. The Chiefs and Packers have also announced that their capacity at their stadiums will be drastically cut. Okay, good. More teams are going along with that. And again, need to keep going, because they need to just shut down altogether. Although neither team gave a specific capacity number like the Ravens, so obviously more to be determined there. It wouldn't be surprising at all if multiple teams end up following in Baltimore's footsteps by drastically cutting their own stadium capacity. For the 2020 season, the NFL is allowing each team to dictate its own capacity this year, with the expectation that the final number will be based on local health rules and protocols that are in place for the coronavirus pandemic. So, but that's a disaster because there should be sweeping nationalized policies on this. But obviously we've seen right from the get-go that with coronavirus that has not been the case and is a large part of the reason why it's such a disaster. But then, okay, so then you'll have teams like the Ravens, the Chiefs, the Packers who might do it better and might, decrease the amount of cases and subsequent deaths that they'll have because they've decreased capacity, etc., and potentially might even not have fans at all. So they might be a lot better off. But let's say, for example, hypothetically, let's say Baltimore decides that they are going to not allow fans at all, right? And their numbers are not as bad in their city, in their state, as let's say Florida, because their political leadership is doing things better, reversing course a little bit or whatever on the reopening, so on and so forth. But then you have a team like, let's say, the Dolphins or the Florida teams, the Bucks, the Jags, if they decide because of the people that they're listening to, the political leadership there, right, and the protocols that are given out there, well, that's a massive disaster because then if they pack their stadiums, full stadiums, then it's just going to be such a fucking disaster. And then the entire NFL will then end up having to shut down because if the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, the Jacksonville Jaguars, and the Miami Dolphins all have massive outbreaks, not just among the, packed stadiums of fans, but also amongst the teams, and then you have players and or coaches dying, then of course they're going to have to eventually shut down. Which means that even the teams that were doing good are then going to have to, suffer the consequences, or the teams that were doing better, would then have to suffer the consequences of an ended season anyway. So the only logical answer is just shut it down from the fucking beginning so that way you don't take any of these risks, which will happen. They're not going to not happen. They're going to have outbreaks. Anyway, one thing that will be interesting to watch is whether or not a reduced capacity will have any effect on a team's home field advantage. Whatever, man. I don't care. I mean, that's frankly superficial as fuck when you look at the greater scheme of things in the bigger picture here. But whatever. I get it. It's part of it. For instance, Baltimore has been one of the toughest places to play over the past 2 years, with the Ravens going 13-3 at home since the start of the 2018 season. However, if there are only 14,000 fans in attendance, or none at all, it will be interesting to see if the Ravens lose their home field edge, which could potentially shake things up for bookies trying to make the odds in Vegas. But just to give that a little bit of service here, that is something that's just yet another complication that will have to be determined or figured out or dealt with, whatever, throughout this season, along with, the under preparation that guys are going to have, the potential spike in injuries, all the lack of whatever, the lack of chemistry and cohesion among squads and coaches, all these things. So anyway, I mean, it's the best answer for football and for health and safety is to just shut down. Even if fans are allowed to attend games, there will still be some major differences from prior seasons. One of the biggest differences is that the NFL is considering the possibility of requiring fans to sign a waiver if they want to attend a game. Again, it's just disgusting though, because especially in places like Florida where they are just actively lying to the people about the status of the situation. Okay, so then if they pack stadiums and people get sick and die, they're the ones that fucking put it on. That's ridiculous. So, that'd be like saying that fucking, the person that holds a party and they're doing a bunch of meth, right? Like it's a meth party. And the person who hosts the party should not be held responsible when people at their party die from doing meth. Like, what the fuck is that? That's retarded. No, what? So I'm gonna host. I don't do meth or any of that. But in this hypothetical situation, let's say I'm the host there. I'm gonna hold a fucking party where there's gonna be a bunch of meth. I'm gonna supply it, probably even two, and then I'm gonna have these people sign waivers so when they come in and overdose on the meth that I give them or whatever, then they can't sue me. Okay. I mean, it's absolutely despicable. Well, I mean, obviously not the dead person, but the family of the dead people can't sue me. Like, because the dead person signed a waiver. And it's absurd because then they can't even defend themselves because they're dead. Like, it's just, it's disgusting. No matter what happens, no team in the NFL will have a full stadium in 2020, and that's because the league has already decided that the top 6 to 8 rows in every building will be blocked off by a tarp. All the protocols are being put in place for the safety of fans, players, and team personnel. Okay, gotta pause there right there for a second, because that's very misleading. So they say that no matter what happens, no team in the NFL will have a full stadium in 2020. Okay, because of the block-offs. Okay, first of all, it's worthy to note that they're doing that, or part of that is that they are obviously going to be then putting ads there so that they can recoup some of the revenue. But they have said absolutely nothing about not filling every single one of the other seats. And the amount of seats, the percentage of the overall capacity, my guess, obviously it differs based on the stadium and their overall capacity, but my guess is that the average is quite low. The percentage of how many seats will be lost due to that. So if they still allow teams, especially teams in places like Florida or Texas, who are, doing things terrible and have the worst leadership that they could possibly have, and if they, leave it up to them to decide, they could easily pack stadiums and then, still have 85, 90% capacity and just have absolute disaster take place. I mean, I'm telling you, man, I've told you guys before, I give you my evaluations and tell you what I think is going to happen. And I give you different example or different situations, right? So I tell you, if they go, and I've said, if they continue to push this, right? If they continue to do this, they open up on training camp and they open the season and they start playing games, especially the more fans that they do have in the stadiums, the higher percentage chance that they will have outbreaks and deaths, right? Now, if they have packed stadiums, it's massively high. If they have empty stadiums, obviously there's no chance that there's outbreaks amongst fans, but there's still a substantial chance that there could be outbreaks amongst teams and in, within organizations in the building, right? So it depends. But I've tried to do my best to give you, what I believe to be accurate predictions based on different threads of factual evidence, right? So because there's some stuff that we know, there's a bunch of hardcore data from the past several months about the trends of the coronavirus and so on and so forth, and all of the decisions that have firmly been made to this point. Those are data points that we can use to help predict and project where things are going from here. However, there are obviously things that are unknown and other decisions that have to be made that will determine the outcome of this entire thing. So pending those, we have to wait and see. But that's why I try and give you guys the best analysis on as many different scenarios as I possibly can. Anyway, before I end this, and this will really be how I end this, because there was a tweet from Barry Jackson noting, the Baltimore Ravens reduction in capacity. So he says, Baltimore Ravens today announced capacity of under 14,000 this season. But then he says, because obviously he covers the Dolphins not ready to make that decision yet, with Florida COVID cases at disconcerting levels. So he obviously notes that the Florida COVID cases, well, he says disconcerting. That is, to me, a bit disingenuous, because it's not, it doesn't really give you the gravity of the situation. Like, it is devastating, the numbers right now just in Florida. I don't have them in front of me, but if I were to pull them up, just the official numbers are devastating. And then that doesn't even take into account what the actual numbers would be if they weren't actively suppressing, like hospitalization numbers and fatality numbers and stuff like that. So, and even a lot of case numbers, because they're doing things like not classifying a lot of sicknesses, illnesses, and deaths as COVID because they weren't able to get testing, which is very limited or not available, or, you know, or because people couldn't go to the hospital because they didn't have insurance, because whatever, all kinds of reasons. There are a myriad of reasons why people didn't end up getting a test, no fault of their own, and then, you know, got sick and or died but didn't get counted because they're not, you know, they're intentionally making sure that there is not enough testing, etc., so they can, anyway, it's gross, man. It's fucking gross. And so it's a giant mess, and obviously there is a lot more to be seen and to determined before this, you know, before we know. But again, they are still pushing to have the season open. It looks like some teams are starting to make the right decisions, or at least going in the right direction, but they still have a long way to go before you know, they all get it right. But let's also note that John Harbaugh of the Ravens was a prominent figurehead that spoke out against the policies and protocols that they were putting into place. So it's not totally and Patrick Mahomes of the Chiefs was also. So those moves are not actually all that surprising because they have some pressure from prominent people. Anyway, so there's a lot to absorb and a lot to wait and see how it plays out. With that, I'm going to get up out of here. I hope you guys appreciate my perspective. If you do, make sure you hit the subscribe button, make sure you hit the like button, make sure you hit the bell if you want to get the alerts. Share my channel and videos with your friends and family. Leave your questions, comments, and concerns down in the comment section. And of course, as always, make sure you follow me on Twitter at Dillon Tartaro. And with that, I am out. I'll see y'all soon. Fins up.